We're next going to talk about using SEC records in your reporting, and our guest is Rob Wells. He's an associate professor of journalism and has been teaching at the University of Arkansas since the fall of 2016. He's a former deputy bureau chief for Dow Jones Newswires and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Bureau, where he oversaw 22 reporters who covered business, economics, and financial news. Before that, he was a business reporter for Dow Jones, Bloomberg News, and the AP. He got his doctorate at Maryland, and he is also the author of The Enforcers, How Little-Known Trade Reporters Exposed the Keating Five in Advanced Business Journalism. Keating Five was a big SNL scandal tied to several senators back in the late 80s, I believe. And beyond that, the coolest thing about Rob I'm going to share with you is that he is the host of Jazz Scoop on KUAF. And I'm putting in the chat a link to one of his recent shows. And so it's, I listened to your show, listened to the show yesterday, Rob, good show. Sad news in the jazz world. I saw that Curtis Fuller died yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So for you jazz fans out there, you can listen to Rob's shows wherever you might be. So Rob, welcome and thanks for coming.
Wow. Thanks, Chris, and thanks for the plug for the Jazz Scoop. This is a great day, I must say. Well, yeah, I appreciate you all taking the time to visit with me. Listening to Diana Enrica, she was has been very influential in my career. She was very kind to write a jacket note for my book, The Enforcers, and I taught her book in my business reporting class at Maryland and at South Carolina for several years. So love hearing her speak, but following Diana Enriquez is just pretty intimidating, I must say, I am going to share my screen here. Let me first drop in a link to this presentation. It's online, it's going to stay online, and the idea is to have a living document, a link that you can share and bookmark and hold on to yourself. This presentation is interactive, and all of the links that we're going to be using are in this web page, this little GitHub web page. What I'll do is talk about overview of corporate research, and then get into some of the nitty-gritty about SEC filings. I'll talk a little bit about my method for researching private companies, and then we'll take a tour through a compilation of my go-to resources for business reporting, and then take your questions and so forth. I really enjoy the opportunity to do this because I get a chance to interact with a great group of reporters. I've done this in the past for the National Press Foundation, and the conversation continued on afterwards, and I was able to help out a couple of reporters with the broad contours of their research. So please, hold on to my number. Let me know if I can help going forward. A lot of you have probably navigated with Securities and Exchange Commission filings at some level, but so my apologies if might start out basic, but we'll get into some stuff that you may not be familiar with here. First off, just sort of a foundation, in terms of corporate research overview. About 15,000 public companies in the country. That's just a shadow of what is in the business sector. Most companies are not publicly traded. Most of them are privately held, and they might be in limited liability corporations or other entities or nonprofits, And so we'll talk about how to dig into those more difficult private companies as well. One of the things that I will work with here is some of the data from the Paycheck Protection Act and that big list of loans that came out. I put a link here, and I have filtered it for Arkansas companies, and I saw a couple of the barbecue places I go to, and all of these other restaurants that got Paycheck Protection Act loans. So I put a link to the most recent PPP data. And even though the money has been exhausted from this list, I find this to be like a pretty interesting list of companies, and might be an entry point for some stories we can discuss later on. One of the things that I do is with my classes, we publish a website called arkansascovid.com, and we're looking a lot at worker safety right now. And so over the summer, we're going to be matching up PPP recipients in Arkansas and see, how many workplace violations or workplace COVID cases they had, for example. So that's something to keep in mind. So SEC, in terms of the history, we're all going to get a hold of Diana's book on the history of the SEC. That's going to be a really great read. And I'm doing some research in the Depression era right now. In fact, my next book is on the Kiplinger newsletter and how it covered the New Deal. So it's kind of a cool thing. But this was a real major revelation in business regulation, the creation of the SEC in 1933, and then the Securities Exchange Act in 34, and basically set up to police the stock market, require a system of disclosure for companies. And the idea is to get this information out into the public, then the markets can try to self-correct and self-police themselves. So this whole concept of corporate disclosure was really built back, in FDR's first term. It was one of the foundational pillars of the New Deal, and companies hated it. They friggin' hated it, and they wanted to get rid of the SEC. They wanted to declare it to be unconstitutional. They found it very intrusive, but it's withheld the test of time. I covered the Securities and Exchange Commission from 94 to about 98, I guess, for the AP in Washington. And it was kind of a pivotal time. That's when the SEC was moving over to electronic disclosure of documents. So I've been kind of at the, sort of the birth of the modern EDGAR system, which they call it the Electronic Data Gathering, Analysis, and Retrieval System. And this has basically all these corporate filings online. And there's a whole bunch of them. The way this presentation works, you can just on a Mac, you can go Control-click and bring up the links in a new tab and keep your old tab back there so you don't lose place. But here's the EDGAR system. How many of you have actually dealt with EDGAR right now? If anybody wants to put up a hand, or okay. So let's see here. Get the Hollywood Squares thing going here. Okay, great. How many of you consider yourself to be really proficient in this? Oh, great, Danielle, nice, good. I found that, my experience, this is it's a black box for a lot of reporters, even at the Wall Street Journal, to really know how to navigate this. It's kind of complicated. The beginnings, the beginning steps here is there are about five filings you want to just really kind of pay attention to. And it's the breaking news, the new developments. They're called the 8K forms. All right. And so those are going to be press releases. And they're going to be, the earnings statements. There'll be announcements that will have some material impact on the company's activities. And that's a term from the securities laws. And that means that something happened that is going to maybe have a bearing on the future financial results of a particular company. So my famous example is like when Steve Jobs died, Apple put out an 8K and a press release. And that press release was there. So most major press releases, will be in the 8K filings. The other form you want to keep an eye on is called it's the proxy statement. They have this horrible name. It's called the definitive 14A. And so that is basically it's the proxy statement that goes with the annual meeting of shareholders. And it has biographical detail about officers and directors, how much they're paid, and a lot of details about executive compensation, but only for the senior officers. Usually you get just the details for the top 3 officers. Some of that executive pay information is also in the annual report, the 10K. The 10K will usually have kind of like a lot of dated information. It may not be the most up to date, but it's a great reference tool to get context about a company. And I use 10Ks all the time and compare the current one to the previous one in specific sections. I find that to be a pretty important tool. And we'll do that here in a little bit. Another important form is called the 10Q. That's a quarterly report that companies have to put out about their financial results. That usually lags the press release by about, a couple of weeks, maybe as many as 6 weeks. Well, why would you want to, look at a recycled, statement of earnings? Because in the 10Q, they put more detail in there than they do in the press release. So when I covered Citibank in New York for the AP, they put out the press release, and then all the good stuff would come out in the 10Q about how messed up their credit card operation was in the 90s, So I was always looking very carefully at the 10Qs and would get stories out of them, compare, what would be in there. For blog posts, if you need a headshot, you can usually get a photo out of the 10K or the proxy statement, and then their biographical information. You can also learn where the executives of these companies might be serving on other boards, which can help build a statement about their influence in the web of connections. Just super important in small states like Arkansas. And then the lawsuit summaries and litigation will be in all 3 of these forms and so forth. So for an example, let me just stop there. Are there any questions about that, at least that part of it? About the
I had one little question.
Yeah,
I
sure, Amy.
tested it out with Pfizer and I got like 7 different entities. So in those situations, how do I know which one I should look at?
Right. So which Pfizer are you going to go after? Right. So, yep, a little bit off the script. We can deal with that. So I would go to finance, Yahoo, and type in Pfizer. And we see the first result gives us Pfizer Inc. with the ticker symbol PFE. Okay. This ticker symbol is a shorthand to allow us to do pretty targeted research of companies. The ticker symbol is also a way to search SEC filings. So let's go back here. See, you can do a company, you can by name, ticker symbol, or CIK. So it was a PFE, right? Pfizer. So that gives us the parent. That is the main Pfizer. Now, if we typed in just Pfizer, we would get all these other entities, a master trust, a Pfizer production, Pfizer Ventures. It's the parent that we would want, Amy. And so typing in PFE will give us let's see, back here into this. I'm going to do the ticker symbol search. Yes, ticker symbols contains PFE. And then you can get the Pfizer parent from this list here. So that's how I would go about and doing it. Does that help? Okay, cool. Great. So going into this with, I use the PPP loan data to find, some of the companies that got large Paycheck Protection Act loans, which were to help them, keep their payroll going, stay afloat during the pandemic. And there was a small Little Rock company that caught my eye called Inuvu, and they got a $1.1 million Paycheck Protection Act loan. I had never really heard of them. They're based in downtown Little Rock. They said they were going to retain 61 jobs. So I decided to go into EDGAR and to look up what's going on with this small company here. So the ticker symbol was Inuvu, brings it right up here. Searching it brings this whole index here. And so we can view the filings, and then they have over here, they've kind of sorted their major filings that I talked about, the annual reports, the periodic reports, proxy, and then the ownership disclosures, where the people who own a large percentage of the companies will talk about when they are buying and selling stocks. We're not going to get into that. So they have a list here of the latest filings, and then you can go for a full index here by viewing filings, and you can see all the different types. As you can, as I discussed, we have the major filings, the quarterlies, the periodic ones. Then there are these obscure things like an SEC staff letter or a notice of effectiveness. There are dozens of these different types of filings, and we're just going to stick with the major ones. So what I wanted to get here is the 10K, the latest latest annual report. And so that would have been back in February. And clicking on this baby, here is Inuvu's annual report. Now a 10K is different than an annual report. An annual report can be more of a PR document. It'll have beautiful photos. It's printed on glossy stock. Everybody looks like they brushed their teeth, looks like they're having a wonderful time. And the 10K gets, has to follow certain legal, outlines for disclosure. So, just make sure if you're asking if a company is talking about annual report versus 10K, you want to stick with this here. We get the name, address of the company, IRS identification number, which could be cool if you needed to do some tax research. And then the parts of this form, they follow a fairly standardized format where they tell you about the business, and they tell you about the risk factors, and then unresolved staff comments. So if there's some dispute about accounting, that'll be in here. And then properties. This will tell you about the physical footprint of the company, which can be really useful if you have like a large company like Walmart or Tyson, to know how many facilities might be in your particular town or city. Legal proceedings. So that'll be the major lawsuits against the company. Mine safety disclosures. So some of this stuff, I have no idea why they put this in here. They have selected financial data and executive compensation. So it follows this sort of standardized format. I just went through this company overview and so forth, and I pulled out a couple key facts here. That this it's a technology company that sells information technology solutions. That they have long-standing relationships with Yahoo and Google and Microsoft Online. They have 71 employees. And when looking at the risk factors, they're saying that the COVID-19 pandemic could have a material adverse impact on our businesses, results, and financial conditions. So they're saying, you know, this term material adverse impact is a very important kind of red flag term, that they could lose a lot of money because of a certain, you know, predicament. And when I first looked at this company over a year ago, they were in really, really bad shape. It was in the spring and they were getting beat up pretty hard. So that's one of the red flags that I put here, that this material adverse impact is a good term to search and to be aware of in these filings, because that is definitely a warning to investors that they could, you know, either lose a lot of money, or maybe even the business could be at risk of staying afloat. So going through this, you can just kind of, you know, find that their story was that they're in the marketing. They're providing software solutions for marketing folks, and they have this valid click platform they call for their online ads, and it was getting hammered. You know, significant reduction in demand for this software solution, less advertising demand, and they were in the travel and leisure markets. So they're in a bad place, you know. We all know that in the COVID pandemic, it was the travel and leisure, you know, sectors that were getting hit the worst, and they were supporting that business. So they were seeing a big drop in their revenue, and that they were heavily reliant on Yahoo and Google for their funding here. So you can see that in key relationships, we see just how exposed these guys were to Yahoo and Google, that these customers were, you know, more than half of their revenue. And it wasn't as bad as it was in 2019, but this is, so they lose one of these contracts, they're going to be in a bad way. They have a, you know, discussion of competition in here, and let's go to the risk factors. So this was one of the main things that we did at the AP, at Bloomberg, and at Dow Jones, was looking at the risk factors and how the risk factor disclosure would change from filing to filing. I mean, one quick and dirty way you can do it is you just copy out the risk factor section, put it in a Word document, put the new one in another Word document, and just do a track changes and see which words change, you know, and that can help you discern, you know, whether, you know, what exactly to focus in on. So this is where they get real with the investors, and they say, we have a history of losses and our revenues have declined. You know, and they're talking about the amount of money they lost during the pandemic. They describe why the pandemic is going to be such a big deal for them. What exactly, you know, is the nature of the loss? And, you know, I just summarized the whole business about travel and leisure. The exposure they have to two big customers, you know, Google and Yahoo. Whether or not we can get loans in the future. Some of this terminology for those of you who don't deal with business reporting, there is this whole secret language they use, and you gain you know, an understanding of key terms just through talking to people in the industry and working with business professors and so forth. But credit facility is basically their whole method of borrowing money, and if you can't maintain your credit facility, it means you can't borrow money, and you could go down if your business model requires, you know, repeated borrowing. And they talk about one of their big loans was from Hitachi, gave them $5 million, you know, so something to keep an eye on. So this can be written in really kind of dry kind of obscure language, and the way you translate it in, for news readers is you talk to the company, you talk to the competitors, find a friendly accounting professor or someone like me who is, dug into these documents and can help you say, aha, I think it's this, and this is the avenue of research, and I think this is the sort of narrative you ought to pursue. It takes a little bit to figure that out, but that's how I've done it over the time. So that's basically some of these risk factors are fairly generic, but you can see there are quite a few of them, and a lot of this is just corporate ass covering, But I look to the things that are topical, like the pandemic and the current revenues, just to find particular stories. So risk factors. You guys wanna, any questions?
Rob, we do have a couple of questions that came in. Do you want to handle those now, or?
Yeah, sure. I can handle them now.
Okay, so we had Amy, and then Lisi, and then Christine. If you guys
Yeah,
could just
sure.
ask your questions verbally,
Yeah, go for it.
and tell them where you're from too.
I'm Amy Sherman. I'm with PolitiFact. The legal proceeding window, does that just capture federal cases through PACER, or does that capture state or local court cases?
It'll capture either one, Amy, so long as it reaches this threshold that it could be some sort of threat to the company or some sort of major payout going forward. Now, when you get to like covering Walmart, the threshold is really friggin' high. I mean, I could go and sue Walmart for something and I would not be a threat. They would not disclose it. But Walmart, when you look in their legal proceedings, you'll see like sometimes no new proceedings, they're getting their asses sued every day somewhere. But like one recent one was the Mexican corruption case, which led to like I think $250 million settlement. So it'll capture both federal or state, but it has to be big enough to be some sort of threat.
Okay, Lisi?
Hi, this is Lisi Beveridge from Mississippi. I report for the Hattiesburg American and Clarion Ledger newspapers. And I was just wondering, is there a way to look up an owner of a company rather than the company itself? For example, like if someone owns like 50 different companies, how do you find them all? Or, so you can just look into what their activities are.
Right. So yeah, Lisi, I'm actually not going to address that in this briefing. It is a much more complex level of research that you would be using the statements of ownership, and you can identify particular individuals through the Form 4s, they're called. Let me make a note here, and I can get you some resources on how that sort of thing works. And that is, you can begin to piece it together through some of these ownership forms. Another way of looking at it is the looking in the proxy statement and the executive compensation for the amount of shares, the percentage of shares that a company will have reported. So let me just show you what that would look like in the case of this little company here. Going back here to, we have a Nuvu and we have our proxy, and here's the proxy statement. I think this would be the one we would want here. Yeah. And then scrolling, the proxy statement has principal stockholders down here. So that's page 22. And principal stockholders. So there we go. So so Charles Morgan owns 5% of the company. So that's one way of beginning to piece it through with proxy statements. You're going to have to use multiple techniques to run that answer down.
Okay, and Christine.
Yeah, hi. So I know SEC filings require a lot of like reading through things manually and just kind of wading through what people are writing. Oh, and I'm a data reporter for the Financial Times. Sorry, I forgot to mention that. And I was wondering if there's any like computer scripts or libraries that you're familiar with that do a good job of automating some of the data extraction process from the SEC filings to kind of, if not eliminate, at least get rid of a lot of the manual work that might be required.
Yep. So yeah, Christine, there's going to be one of my next projects is doing this in R. All of this is tagged in a markup language, and we're just looking at the HTML rendering version. But all of these sections are you can pull them out through an XBLR markup language, which allows you to search specific sections and pull them out. I know of a Python library that does that, a Python program, and there's an R program. I have not used them yet, but there is that ability to pull that together, and it's being pretty widely used in finance and in higher levels of journalism. What we did back at Dow Jones and at AP, well, Bloomberg was a completely different thing. Really had it down. But at least at Dow Jones and AP is we paid for a subscription for a third-party vendor. It was called Disclosure Incorporated at the time, and they had set up a scraper and would alert us to any significant changes in fields that we had identified. So it seemed to me to be complete black magic at the time, but now after dealing with R quite a bit and dealing with APIs, I can see how you can pull that together, and it wouldn't be terribly complicated, especially now that these files are in a pretty highly structured data format.
Okay, question from Sabrina.
Hello, Sabrina, business reporter with the Las Vegas Review-Journal. So I always look at the risk factors in the 10Ks, but what I wanted to ask, which is something I've been thinking about lately, is when talking to analysts, I've noticed that when I've brought it up, they don't tend to see it as much of a concern. They usually just refer me to the actual financial statements, which I get. But I'm just wondering, like, how much weight should I be placing on them?
Right.
Story?
So, the agenda of the financial analyst is different than the agenda of a journalist, and they're good for kind of sniffing out, some issues, but they completely miss the boat on the public interest in a lot of ways. I would put weight on the risk factors in a 10K or a 10Q if you believe it's in the public interest, and you are confident that the risk factor is an outlier within the company's peer group. So I'd look at top couple companies, and in Vegas, some of the other big casino companies, and you would get a sense for what is kind of normative behavior in that peer group. And if you see a risk factor that deviates from that, I would think that would be a story. That's a great news town you're in there, I tell you, Sabrina.
Yeah, it is.
Joanne Morrison's a buddy of mine, and I used to, I was a reporter in Nevada for a bit, so I love covering Nevada politics.
Question from Hayat.
Hi, yeah. I was just wondering if you had any tips for ways to find the human element to these SEC stories. If you do come across something in an SEC filing that you want to write about, how to sell it to an editor and a reader, make it interesting to someone who may not necessarily read a lot of company news. Especially for reporters who may not, I'm a state government reporter, and sometimes maybe searching for these companies, we don't really have a dedicated business reporter to search for these SEC filings regularly. So I don't have, the inside sources to these companies and don't normally report on them.
Yeah. It's a great question, Hyatt. So what I would do is, in my stories, probably there would be very little that I would quote from an SEC filing. It would all be based on the interviews that I do. And I use this as a launching off point to try to humanize it. The main things I think for human concern is, will this company stay in business? And if it doesn't, then what does that mean for the workers? How many workers will go out of business? Like you think of Enron when it collapsed, and what does it mean when if the company collapses? Well, all these Enron workers got hammered with their pensions and had their life savings wiped out. So that was, a very big human element covering, pensions as your nest egg getting ripped off, the inequity between the executive pay and the typical salary of the workers, always a good human element. The any executive perks that are out of line with the industry, or like security services and things like that would be human elements. And then just kind of thinking about the impact of the company generally. So my students just finished an investigative project about the prevalence of COVID in the workplace in Arkansas, and we looked at all the different factories and workplaces and found that Tyson came up with about a third of all the COVID cases in the state, and that was an important fact, but it was the worker interviews that really brought that to the forefront. So much of business reporting is just using, these documents and this market knowledge as a launching off point to tell a human story.
Okay, question from Bridget.
Hi, I'm Bridget Bowman with CQ Roll Call, and I cover campaigns, which is why I'm asking this question.
Sure.
Sorry, this is a little off topic, but I was curious if you had any advice for using SEC or tax documents to find out if there's a certain company or something behind a dark money group that's like, always has generic names like Americans for Jobs or something, and like starts spending in a campaign.
Yeah, Bridget, I did a lot of that similar research too when I was in DC, and it was a sort of a different era. It's just become so much more complex. A lot of these, I think it wouldn't be SEC filings, but it'd be more of the local Secretary of State records that would help you trace it back to a parent entity that would be, like JP Morgan or Exxon or what have you. Unless they were spending at some extraordinary amount in campaigns, it wouldn't be disclosed in here. And so the SEC filings are going to be more useful when trying to background the actors that you've identified as major campaign contributors. And it's going to be really useful to look at the web of influence. So you get this chief financial officer at an energy company, Rob Wells. Well, Rob Wells is on the boards of Disney and all these other companies. So that would speak to his ability to maybe influence others. So Yeah, so I'd use it more in terms of backgrounding individuals and use the Secretary of State's office to actually trace the particular entities. It's tough work, man. Those things are set up through very obscure entities for very good reasons. And I would hit a wall, and I would basically have to talk to forensic accountants to help me kind of penetrate this, and tax shelter experts and things like that. My expertise is good, but it's not at that level.
Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Very cool. Let me continue on and just kind of hit some more of the highlights. You guys are getting a sense of what I'm after here. So I had a couple more things about the ANOVA. We'll just move on from there. I want to show you a trick that I came up with on how to do special localized research in your area using SEC filings. And so this is a weird back-end part of the SEC EDGAR system where you can put in, you know, the state, the form, and get these specific EDGAR searches here. Let's get this thing. There we go. So here are all the different search fields. And Christine, when I talked about structured data, here you go, man. Right? You got all your tags right here. And so you can, you know, if you wanted to build something in Python or R, you know, you can, you know, that's your whole business on using structured data. We can put in a search string here. Let me pull this off. So like for state, Arkansas, and I'm going to pull up state, Arkansas, and then form type 10K for 2021. And we're going to start this in 2020. And this is not cooperating with me. We're going to do this here. There we go. And these are all the Arkansas, you know, companies and their forms. And then you layer on the searches with using others. So bring in zip code in my town here. Let's see, zip code. Okay, and so these are all Arkansas companies in my current zip code. So this will give you a sense of, you know, sort of investor activity in your neighborhood. In the case here, these Form Ds are investor holding disclosures. And so they're private investors who are changing their holdings in a particular company. And then we have a public company here with a annual and quarterly report. So that's a cool little trick to experiment with if you wanted to get into basic background in your company and in your community. So I have a couple other examples on how this works here. The way I found ANOVA, by the way, I just, you know, I pulled up this. This is the Small Business Association data, and it's a huge spreadsheet. And now I'm getting the wheel of death here, but it's got almost a million records in this one spreadsheet. And anybody, Christine knows what I'm talking about. You know, Excel doesn't play well with big data sets. That's why you need
Yeah,
R.
definitely not.
Yeah, so it kind of freaks out. But I filtered it and I just sorted, you know, by the largest to figure out, you know, which ones were taking major, you know, PPP loans, and then did just a search through the Google or Yahoo Finance for ticker symbols, and then came up with it. So the next thing was a sort of a joke that I came up in one of my classes, I thought it'd be a fun way to teach, how to do company research by investigating who owned the dive bar in my neighborhood in Maryland. And this led to this rather elaborate joke. Here's the dive bar. But it is a pretty good, method for finding private companies. And I just want to talk about, how to use these different resources to get the information on a private company. There's no one place. You gotta search all these different avenues and keep very good notes about what you have found, and especially individuals and addresses, and then maybe run that search again with those individuals and addresses. And so this whole method that I've come up with, I call it the staircase method for private business research. And it starts with the business charter, getting the business charter record, then getting the property tax record. See if these two have the same owners and the same addresses. If not, then take the address from the property tax and run it through the business charter again, and begin to figure out, well, if these people are different, then why? Look at the property search. See if the deed owner is the same as the business charter person. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. You can begin to see, this goes back to that web of influence that, and we see this might be something you might want to do down in Mississippi. And then look for uniform commercial code filings, which are basically statements that you have hawked some piece of equipment to get a loan. You've put up in a restaurant, you put up a refrigerator or a car to get as collateral for a loan. Going through this, I talk about how all these this method works, and I'll let you guys kind of go through this on your own, because I hit the high points here. In the research of a private company, you always want to ask, where does this business intersect with the government? So with a restaurant, it'd be the health department. They're going to be health inspection records. So get the records, and then match them against the business ownership records, the charter and the property tax records, and you'll have people to talk to. That is the beginning of doing the interviews, and you can get a paper trail together. So my staircase method involves really good note taking. And I will usually create a spreadsheet just to kind of keep track of all the different entities involved, line them up. It's time consuming. If you're at the rare news organization that actually still has subscriptions to expensive databases, or has a friggin' librarian, you can run it through Dun & Bradstreet's or any number of these, or Lexis, or any number of these proprietary databases. I assume in my lessons that nobody has these things, and this is how you do it from the ground up. And this is how you would do all this sort of research. The Dun & Bradstreet's does have a free tool where you can kind of get, at least the names of the companies, lined up, so you're not getting lost in different company names. The apostrophe S versus an S will make a difference in your database searches, so you need to run that down. And I've got a little bit here on international data searches. So for like business charter records here, just pull this out. This is example in Maryland. So let's type in, I think that's here we go. Herald Harbor Hideaway was the dive bar. Actually, not a bad place. And we can look up, here we get the certificate of renewal. So we got an address here. So this is some dude who lived down by the river, who had a limousine service, and you know, he was the owner of that bar. And we can go in here to look at all the different, you know, when he registered it and whose name it was registered in, and so forth. So that just gives you, you know, sort of a sense of how, you know, business registration numbers would work. And it's kicking up a PDF. We'll just download this here. What the hell? We'll take a look at it. And sketchy corporate record. Paid $25, expedited fee, $75 to register his company. We got the address. Looking at the originals are always kind of fun. You get a sense of the professionalism of the entity, you know. Looks like he wrote this all out on the hood of his car, you know. You get, you know, just looking at these documents can be kind of illuminating. And then we also had in there a number for their business identification license. So then there's the property tax records. Here's some examples of how to go through those. And then my questions, you know, who's paying the tax bill? Might be someone different. The small business owners may rent or lease their space. See if the owners are different from the business owners. Deed search, UCC filing, state occupational licenses. Again, you know, where do these companies intersect with the government? And, you know, somebody who cuts your hair is going to have a license. Acupuncturist is going to have a license, you know. So you can look up all these states, even in, you know, red states like mine in Arkansas will have these sorts of regulatory licenses. A couple other things that I would recommend is read your local business journal. Really good resource. Subscribe to it so you can get to the background. This, Bridget, I think is going to be really useful for you when trying to investigate, you know, political actors in various companies, if you know, various counties and various states. If you had a subscription to some of these ABC journals, you can go into their archives. You can find out, you know, when they were, you know, involved in local civic events, and might provide some context and some more people to talk to. This was something about how to do more in-depth research by industry using the PPP data. This was an article I wrote for the Reynolds Center for Investigative for Journalism on how to do investigative business reporting. And then the resources I have down here will tell you, like if you get stumped on a term, which, you know, I go here almost every week, you know, what is a, you know, debt security, you know, and debt security definition, instead of having the Barron's Financial Dictionary, Investopedia is here, and they give you a weird little video on how to define a debt security. I have a whole list that will give you the basic introduction to the markets, how to write about profits and losses using the AP style book, more information on how to track SEC filings, how to look up SEC enforcement cases, some campaign finance stuff here that Bridget already has, and you know, how to do. Here's this Wayback Machine is great for tracing down people, man, really great. Nonprofits, GuideStar, and so forth. So I hope this is will be a good living resource for you. I'll keep it up on my GitHub until they kick me off. And thought I would spend the last couple minutes here just tackling a couple questions if folks.
Yeah. So we had a couple of questions. Rob, I have one quick one for you. Investopedia, I often come across that in Google searches. Does that have you know, editors who are vetting the information, or is that
Yes.
more Wikipedia-like?
Oh, no, it's a news organization. It has, I think Diana Enriquez turned me on to Investopedia. So,
Okay.
yeah, it's legit. It's not a free for all.
Okay, so let me see. I got Lisa, I'm not sure if this question's been answered already, but do you still have a question, or does anybody else have a question for Rob?
Rachel Riley with the Everett Daily Herald. I'm dealing with a bunch of companies who are sort of big companies that are trying to walk away from cleanup jobs at factory sites, pretty major sites. Is there a place in their SEC filings where I might find information about like liabilities associated with environmental contamination? And if those things are not listed as liabilities, can I read into that?
Yeah. So Rachel, that's how I got into business reporting, was running down the same question about some scumbag coal mining companies in Eastern Kentucky. And that's how I got into this whole thing. It's like, I needed to try to figure this out. So yes, the 10K and the 10Qs in their risk factors will have to disclose, the contingent liabilities of cleanup costs. And then you would go into the EPA's toxic waste inventory database and find out the scale of the problem. So yes, that will be something that will be in there. And if it's not in there, that's a good question to ask. You guys are, we have a bunch of kids who have cancer in the neighborhood next door, and you're being sued. Why isn't this being disclosed in your annual filings? Good luck with that.
Okay, any final questions? All right, Rob, well, I want to thank you very much. Again, thanks for your patience and the flexibility on the schedule. So thank you very much, and for having that kind of living document that the fellows can go back to. We'll make sure that you have the link for that, and you can continue to use that as he updates it down the road.